This week's Grimm Fairy Tales, Hansel and Gretel. Hard by a great forest dwelt a poor woodcutter with his wife and his 2 children. The boy was called Hansel and the girl, Gretel. He had little to bite and to break, and once, when great scarcity fell on the land, he could no longer procure daily bread. Now, when he thought over this by night in his bed, and tossed about in his anxiety, he groaned and said to his wife, "What is to become of us? How are we to feed our poor children, when we no longer have anything even for ourselves?" "I'll tell you what, husband," answered the woman. "Early tomorrow morning we will take the children out into the forest, to where it is the thickest. There we will light a fire for them, and give each of them 1 piece of bread more, and then we will go to our work and leave them alone. They will not find the way home again, and we shall be rid of them." "No, wife," said the man, "I will not do that. How can I bear to leave my children alone in the forest? The wild animals would soon come and tear them to pieces." "Oh, thou fool," said she, "then we must all 4 die of hunger. Thou mayest as well plane the planks for our coffins." And she left him no peace until he consented. "But I feel very sorry for the poor children, all the same," said the man. The 2 children had also not been able to sleep for hunger, and had heard what their stepmother had said to their father. Gretel wept bitter tears and said to Hansel, "Now all is over with us." "Be quiet, Gretel," said Hansel. "Do not distress thyself. I will soon find a way to help us." And when the old folks had fallen asleep, he got up, put on his little coat, opened the door below, and crept outside. The moon shone brightly, and the white pebbles which lay in front of the house glittered like real silver pennies. Hansel stooped and put as many of them in his little pocket of his coat as he could possibly get in. Then he went back and said to Gretel, "Be comforted, dear little sister, and sleep in peace." And said to Gretel, "Be comforted, dear little sister, and sleep in peace. God will not forsake us." And he lay down again in his bed. When day dawned, but before the sun had risen, the woman came and awoke the 2 children, saying, "Get up, you sluggards. We are going into the forest to fetch wood." She gave each a little piece of bread and said, "There is something for your dinner, but do not eat it up before then, for you will get nothing else." Gretel took the bread under her apron, as Hansel had the stones in his pocket. Then they all set out together on the way to the forest. When they had walked a short time, Hansel stood still and peeped back at the house, and did so again and again. His father said, "Hansel, what art thou looking at there and staying behind for? Mind what thou art about, and do not forget how to use thy legs." "Ah, father," said Hansel, "I am looking at my little white cat, which is sitting up on the roof and wants to say goodbye to me." The wife said, "Fool, that is not thy little cat. That is the morning sun which is shining on the chimneys." Hansel, however, had not been looking back at the cat, but had been constantly throwing one of the white pebble stones out of his pocket on the road. When they had reached the middle of the forest, the father said, "Now, children, pile up some wood, and I will light a fire that you may not be cold." Hansel and Gretel gathered brushwood together, as high as a little hill. The brushwood was lighted, and when the flames were burning very high, the woman said, "Now, children, lay yourselves down by the fire and rest. We will go into the forest and cut some wood. When we have done, we will come back and fetch you away." Hansel and Gretel sat by the fire, and when noon came, each ate a little piece of bread, and as they heard the strokes of the wood axe, they believed that their father was near. It was not, however, the axe. It was a branch which he had fastened to a withered tree, which the wind was blowing backwards and forwards, And as they had been sitting such a long time, their eyes shut with fatigue, and they fell fast asleep. When at last they awoke, it was already dark at night. Gretel began to cry and said, "How are we going to get out of the forest now?" But Hansel comforted her and said, "Just wait a little until the moon has risen, and then we will soon find the way." And when the full moon had risen, Hansel took his little sister by the hand and followed the pebbles which shone like newly coined silver pieces, and showed them the way. They walked the whole night long, and by break of day came once more to their father's house. They knocked at the door, and when the woman opened it and saw it was Hansel and Gretel, she said, "You naughty children, why have you slept so long in the forest? We thought you were never coming back at all." The father, however, rejoiced, for it had cut him to the heart to leave them behind alone. Not long afterwards, there was once more great scarcity in all parts, and the children heard their mother saying at night to their father, "Everything is eaten again. We have 1/2 loaf left, and after that there is an end. The children must go. We will take them farther into the wood, so that they will not find their way out again. There is no other means of saving ourselves." The man's heart was heavy, and he thought, "It would be better for thee to share the last mouthful with thy children." The woman, however, would listen to nothing that he had to say, but scolded and reproached him. He who says A must say B likewise, and as he had yielded the first time, he had to do so a second time also. The children were, however, still awake and had heard the conversation. When the old folks were asleep, Hansel again got up and wanted to go out and pick up pebbles as he had done before. But the woman had locked the door, and Hansel could not get out. Nevertheless, he comforted his little sister and said, "Do not cry, Gretel. Go to sleep quietly. The good God will help us." Early in the morning came the woman, and took the children out of their beds. Their bit of bread was given to them, but it was still smaller than the time before. On the way into the forest, Hansel crumbled his in his pocket, and often stood still and threw a morsel on the ground. "Hansel, why dost thou stop and look round?" said the father. "I am looking back at the little pigeon which is sitting on the roof and wants to say goodbye to me," answered Hansel. "Simpleton," said the woman, "that is not thy little pigeon. That is the morning sun that is shining on the chimney." Hansel, however, little by little threw all the crumbs on the path. The woman led the children still deeper into the forest, where they had never in their lives been before. Then a great fire was again made, and the mother said, "Just sit there, you children, and when you are tired you may sleep a little. We are going into the forest to cut wood, and in the evening when we are done we will come and fetch you away." When it was noon, Gretel shared her piece of bread with Hansel, who had scattered his by the way. Then they fell asleep, and evening came and went. But no one came to the poor children. They did not awake until it was dark night. And Hansel comforted his little sister and said, "Just wait, Gretel, until the moon rises, and then we shall see the crumbs of bread which I have strewn about. They will show us our way home again." When the moon came, they set out. But they found no crumbs, for the many thousands of birds which fly about in the woods and fields had picked them all up. Hansel said to Gretel, "We shall soon find the way," but then did not find it. They walked the whole night and all the next day, too, from morning till evening, but they did not get out of the forest, and were very hungry, for they had nothing to eat but 2 or 3 berries, which grew on the ground. And as they were so weary that their legs would carry them no longer, they lay down beneath a tree and fell asleep. It was now 3 mornings since they had left their father's house. They began to walk again, but they always got deeper into the forest, and if help did not come soon, they must die of hunger and weariness. When it was midday, they saw a beautiful snow-white bird sitting a bough, which sang so delightfully that they stood still and listened to it. And when it had finished its song, it spread its wings and flew away before them, and they followed it until they reached a little house, on the roof of which it alighted. And when they came quite up to the little house, they saw that it was built of bread and covered with cakes, but that the windows were of clear sugar. "We will set to work on that," said Hansel, "and have a good meal. I will eat a bit of the roof, and thou, Gretel, canst eat some of the window. It will taste sweet." Hansel reached up above and broke off a little of the roof to try how it tasted, and Gretel leaned against a window and nibbled at the panes. Then a soft voice cried from the room, "Nibble, nibble, gnaw. Who is nibbling at my little house?" The children answered, the wind, the heaven-born wind," and went on eating without disturbing themselves. Hansel, who thought the roof tasted very nice, tore down a great piece of it, and Gretel pushed out the whole of one round window pane and sat down and enjoyed herself with it. Suddenly the door opened, and a very, very old woman, who supported herself on crutches, came creeping out. Hansel and Gretel were so terribly frightened that they let fall what they had in their hands. The old woman, however, nodded her head and said, "Oh, you dear children, who has brought you here? Do come in and stay with me. No harm shall happen to you." She took them both by the hand and led them into her little house. Then good food was set before them, milk and pancakes with sugar, apples and nuts. Afterwards, 2 pretty little beds were covered with clean white linen, and Hansel and Gretel laid down in them and thought they were in heaven. The old woman had only pretended to be so kind. She was in reality a wicked witch, who lay in wait for children, and had only built the little house of bread in order to entice them there. When a child fell into her power, she killed it, cooked it, and ate it, and that was a feast day with her. Witches have red eyes and cannot see far, but they have a keen scent like a beast's, and are aware when human beings draw near. When Hansel and Gretel came into her neighborhood, she laughed maliciously and said mockingly, "I have them. They shall not escape me again." Early in the morning, before the children were awake, she was already up, and when she saw both of them sleeping and looking so pretty with their plump red cheeks, she muttered to herself, "That will be a dainty mouthful." Then she seized Hansel with her shriveled hand, carried him into a little stable, and shut him in with a grated door. He might scream as he liked. That was of no use. Then she went to Gretel, shook her till she awoke, and cried, "Get up, lazy thing. Fetch some water and cook something good for thy brother. He is in the stable outside, and is to be made fat. When he is fat, I will eat him." Gretel began to weep bitterly, but it was all in vain. She was forced to do what the wicked witch ordered her, and now the best food was cooked for poor Hansel, but Gretel got nothing but crab shells. Every morning the woman crept to the little stable and cried, "Hansel, stretch out thy finger that I may feel if thou wilt soon be fat." Hansel, however, stretched out a little bone to her, and the old woman, who had dim eyes, could not see it, and thought it was Hansel's finger, and was astonished that there was no way of fattening him. When 4 weeks had gone by and Hansel still continued thin, she was seized with impatience and would not wait any longer. "Hola, Gretel," she cried to the girl. "Be active and bring some water. Let Hansel be fat or lean tomorrow. I will kill him and cook him." Ah, how the poor little sister did lament when she had to fetch the water, and how her tears did flow down over her cheeks. "Dear God, do help us," she cried. "If the wild beasts in the forest had but devoured us, we should at any rate have died together." "Just keep thy noise to thyself," said the old woman. All that won't help thee at all." Early in the morning, Gretel had to go out and hang up the cauldron with the water and light the fire. "We will bake first," said the old woman. "I have already heated the oven and kneaded the dough." She pushed poor Gretel out to the oven, from which flames of fire were already darting. "Creep in," said the witch, "and see if it is properly heated, so that we can shut the bread in." And when once Gretel was inside, she intended to shut the oven and let her bake in it, and then she would eat her too. But Gretel saw what she had in her mind, and said, "I do not know how I am to do it. How do you get in?" "Silly goose," said the old woman. "The door is big enough. Just look, I can get in myself." And she crept up and thrust her head into the oven. Then Gretel gave her a push that drove her far into it, and shut the iron door and fastened the bolt. Oh! Then she began to howl quite horribly. But Gretel ran away, and the godless witch was miserably burnt to death. Gretel, however, ran like lightning to Hansel, opened his little stable, and cried, "Hansel, we are saved, the old witch is dead." Then Hansel sprang out like a bird from its cage when the door is opened for it. How they did rejoice and embrace each other, and dance about and kiss each other. And as they had no longer any need to fear her, they went into the witch's house, and in every corner stood chests full of pearls and jewels. "These are far better than pebbles," said Hansel, and thrust into his pockets whatever could be got in. And Gretel said, "I too will take something home with me," and filled her pinafore full. "But now we will go away," said Hansel, "that we may get out of the witch's forest." When they had walked for 2 hours, they came to a great piece of water. "We cannot get over," said Hansel. "I see no footplank and no bridge." "And no boat crosses either," answered Gretel, "but a white duck is swimming there. If I ask her, she will help us over." Then she cried, little duck, dost thou see? Hansel and Gretel are waiting for thee. There's never a plank or bridge in sight. Take us across on thy back so white." The duck came to them, and Hansel seated himself on its back, and told his sister to sit by him. "No," replied Gretel, "that will be too heavy for the little duck. She shall take us across one after the other." The good little duck did so, and when they were once safely across and had walked for a short time, the forest seemed to be more and more familiar to them, and at length they saw from afar their father's house. Then they began to run, rushed into the parlor, and threw themselves into their father's arms. The man had not known one happy hour since he had left the children in the forest. The woman, however, was dead. Gretel emptied her pinafore until pearls and precious stones ran about the room, and Hansel threw one handful after another out of his pocket to add to them. Then all anxiety was at an end, and they lived together in perfect happiness. My tale is done. There runs a mouse, whosoever catches it may make himself a big fur cap out of it. The old man made young again. In the time when our Lord still walked this earth, he and St. Peter stopped one evening at a smith's and received free quarters. Then it came to pass that a poor beggar, hardly pressed by age and infirmity, came to this house and begged alms of the smith. St. Peter had compassion on him and said, "Lord and Master, if it pleases thee, curse his torments, that he may be able to win his own bread." The Lord said kindly, "Smith, lend me thy forge, and put on some coals for me, and then I will make this ailing old man young again." The smith was quite willing, and St. Peter blew the bellows, and when the coal fire sparkled up large and high, our Lord took the little old man, pushed him in the forge in the midst of the red-hot fire, so that he glowed like a rose bush, and praised God with a loud voice. After that, the Lord went to the quenching tub, put the glowing little man into it so that the water closed over him, and after he had carefully cooled him, gave him his blessing, when behold, the little man sprang nimbly out, looking fresh, straight, healthy, and as if he were but 20. The smith, who had watched everything closely and attentively, invited them all to supper. He, however, had an old half-blind crooked mother-in-law who went to the youth, and with great earnestness asked if the fire had burnt him much. He answered that he had never felt more comfortable, and that he had sat in the red heat as if he had been in cool dew. The youth's words echoed in the ears of the old woman all night long, and early next morning, when the Lord had gone on his way again, and had heartily thanked the smith, the latter thought he might make his old mother-in-law young again likewise, as he had watched everything so carefully, and it lay in the province of his trade. So he called to ask her if she, too, would like to go bounding about like a girl of 18. She said, "With all my heart, as the youth has come out of it so well." So the smith made a great fire, and thrust the old woman into it, and she writhed about this way and that, and uttered terrible cries of murder. "Sit still, why art thou screaming and jumping about so?" cried he, and as he spoke he blew the bellows again until all her rags were burnt. The old woman cried without ceasing, and the smith thought to himself, "I have not quite the right art," and took her out and threw her into the cooling tub. Then she screamed so loudly that the smith's wife upstairs and her daughter-in-law heard, and they both ran downstairs and saw the old woman lying in a heap in the quenching tub, howling and screaming with her face wrinkled and shriveled and all out of shape. Thereupon the two, who were both with child, were so terrified that very night 2 boys were born who were not made like men but apes, and they ran into the woods, and from them sprang the race of apes. Master Pfriem. Master Pfriem was a short, thin, but lively man, who never rested a moment. His face, of which his turned-up nose was the only prominent feature, was marked with smallpox and pale as death. His hair was gray and shaggy, his eyes small, but they glanced perpetually about on all sides. He saw everything, criticized everything, knew everything best, and was always in the right. When he went into the streets, he moved his arms about as if he were rowing, and once he struck the pail of a girl who was carrying water, so high in the air that he himself was wetted all over by it. "Stupid thing," cried he to her, while he was shaking himself. "Couldst thou not see that I was coming behind thee?" By trade, he was a shoemaker, and when he worked, he pulled his thread out with such force that he drove his fist into every one who did not keep far enough off. No apprentice stayed more than a month with him, for he had always some fault to find with the very best work. At one time, it was that the stitches were not even. At another, that one shoe was too long, or one heel higher than the other, or the leather not cut large enough. "Wait," said he to his apprentice, "I will soon show thee how we make skin soft." And he brought a strap and gave him a couple of strokes across the back. He called them all sluggards. He himself did not turn much work out of his hands, for he never sat still for a quarter of an hour. If his wife got up very early in the morning and lighted the fire, he jumped out of bed and ran barefooted into the kitchen, crying, "Wilt thou burn my house down for me? That is a fire one could roast an ox by. Does wood cost nothing?" If the servants weren't standing by their washtubs and laughing and telling each other all they knew, he scolded them and said, "There stand these geese cackling and forgetting their work to gossip. And why fresh soap? Disgraceful extravagance and shameful idleness into the bargain. They want to save their hands and not rub the things properly. And out he would run and knock a pail full of soap and water over, so that the whole kitchen was flooded. Someone was building a new house, so he hurried to the window to look on. There, they are using that red sandstone again that never dries, he cried. No one will ever be healthy in that house, and just look how badly the fellows are laying the stones. Besides, the mortar is good for nothing. It ought to have gravel in it, not sand. I shall live to see that house tumble down on the people who are in it. He sat down, put a couple of stitches in, and then jumped up again, unfastened his leather apron, and cried, I will just go out and appeal to those men's consciences. He stumbled on the carpenters. What's this? Cried he. You're not working by the line. Do you expect the beams to be straight? One wrong will put all wrong. He snatched an axe out of a carpenter's hand and wanted to show him how he ought to cut. But as a cart loaded with clay came by, he threw the axe away and hastened to the peasant who was walking by the side of it. You're not in your right mind, said he. Who yokes young horses to a heavily laden cart? The poor beast will die on the spot. The peasant did not give him an answer, and Pfriem, in a rage, ran back into his workshop. When he was setting himself to work again, the apprentice reached him a shoe. Well, what's that again? Screamed he. Haven't I told you you ought not to cut shoes so broad? Who would buy a shoe like this, which is hardly anything else but a sole? I insist on my orders being followed exactly. Master, answered the apprentice, you may easily be quite right about the shoe being a bad one, but it is the one which you yourself cut out, and yourself set to work at. When you jumped up a while since, you knocked it off the table, and I have only just picked it up. An angel from heaven, however, would never make you believe that. One night, Master Pfriem dreamed he was dead, and on his way to heaven. When he got there, he knocked loudly at the door. I wonder, said he to himself, that they have no knocker on this door. One knocks, one's knuckles sore. The Apostle Peter opened the door and wanted to see who demanded admission so noisily. Ah, it's you, Master Pfriem, said he. Well, I'll let you in, but I warn you that you must give up that habit of yours and find fault with nothing you see in heaven, or you may fare ill. You might have spared your warnings, answered Pfriem. I know already what is seemly, and here, God be thanked, everything is perfect and there is nothing to blame as there is on earth. So he went in and walked up and down the wide expanses of heaven. He looked around him, to the left and to the right, but sometimes shook his head or muttered something to himself. Then he saw two angels who were carrying away a beam. It was the beam which someone had had in his own eye, whilst he was looking for the splinter in the eye of another. They did not, however, carry the beam lengthways, but obliquely. Did anyone ever see such a piece of stupidity? Thought Master Pfriem. But he said nothing, and seemed satisfied with it. It comes to the same thing after all, whichever way they carry the beam, straight or crooked, if they only get along with it, and truly I do not see them knock against anything. Soon after this, he saw two angels who were drawing water out of a well into a bucket. But at the same time, he observed that the bucket was full of holes, and that the water was running out of it in every side. They were watering the earth with rain. Hang it, he exclaimed, but happily recollected himself and thought, perhaps it is only a pastime. If it is an amusement, then it seems they can do useless things of this kind even here in heaven, where people, as I have already noticed, do nothing but idle about. He went farther and saw a cart which had stuck fast in a deep hole. It's no wonder, said he to the man who stood by it. Who would load so unreasonably? What have you there?" "Good wishes," replied the man. "I could not go along the right way with it, but still I have pushed it safely up here, and they won't leave me sticking here. In fact, an angel did come and harness 2 horses to it." "That's quite right," thought Pfriem. "But 2 horses won't get that cart out. It must at least have 4 to it." Another angel came and brought 2 more horses. She did not, however, harness them in front of it, but behind. That was too much for Master Pfriem. Clumsy creature. He burst out with, "What are you doing there? Has anyone ever since the world began seen a cart drawn in that way? But you, in your conceited arrogance, think that you know everything best." He was going to say more, but one of the inhabitants of heaven seized him by the throat and pushed him forth with irresistible strength. Beneath the gateway, Master Pfriem turned his head round to take one more look at the cart, and saw that it was being raised into the air by 4 winged horses. At this moment, Master Pfriem awoke. "Things are certainly arranged in heaven otherwise than they are on earth," said he to himself, "and that excuses much. But who could see horses harnessed both behind and before with patience? To be sure they had wings, but who could know that? It is besides great folly to fix a pair of wings to a horse that has 4 legs to run with already. But I must get up, or else they will make nothing but mistakes for me in my house. It is a lucky thing for me, though, that I am not really dead." Iron John. There was once on a time a king who had a great forest near his palace, full of all kinds of wild animals. One day he sent out a huntsman to shoot him a roe, but he did not come back. "Perhaps some accident has befallen him," said the king, and the next day he sent out 2 more huntsmen who were to search for him, but they too stayed away. Then on the 3rd day he sent for all his huntsmen and said, "Scour the whole forest through, and do not give up until ye have found all 3. But of these also none came home again, and of the pack of hounds which they had taken with them, none were seen more. From that time forth no one would any longer venture into the forest, and it lay there in deep stillness and solitude, and nothing was seen of it, but sometimes an eagle or a hawk flying over it. This lasted for many years, when a strange huntsman announced himself to the king as seeking a situation, and offered to go into the dangerous forest. The king, however, would not give his consent, and said, "It is not safe in there. I fear it would fare with thee no better than with the others, and thou wouldst never come out again." The huntsman replied, "Lord, I will venture it at my own risk. Of fear I know nothing." The huntsman therefore betook himself with his dog to the forest. It was not long before the dog fell in with some game on the way, and wanted to pursue it, but hardly had the dog run 2 steps when it stood before a dead pool, could go no farther, and a naked arm stretched itself out of the water, seized it, and drew it under. When the huntsman saw that, he went back and fetched 3 men to come with buckets and bail out the water. When they could see to the bottom, there lay a wild man whose body was brown like rusty iron, and whose hair hung over his face down to his knees. They bound him with cords and led him away to the castle. There was great astonishment over the wild man. The king, however, had him put in an iron cage in his courtyard, and forbade the door to be opened on pain of death. And the queen herself was to take the key into her keeping. And from this time forth everyone could again go into the forest with safety. The king had a son of 8 years, who was once playing in the courtyard, and while he was playing his golden ball fell into the cage. The boy ran thither and said, "Give me my ball out." "Not till thou hast opened the door for me," answered the man. "No," said the boy, "I will not do that. The king has forbidden it," and ran away. The next day he again went and asked for his ball. The wild man said, "Open my door." But the boy would not. On the third day the king had ridden out hunting, and the boy went out once more and said, "I cannot open the door even if I wished, for I have not the key." Then the wild man said, "It lies under thy mother's pillow. Thou canst get in there." The boy, who wanted to have his ball back, cast all thought to the winds and brought the key. The door opened with difficulty, and the boy pinched his fingers. When it was open, the wild man stepped out, gave him the golden ball, and hurried away. The boy had become afraid. He called and cried after him, "Oh, wild man, do not go away, or I shall be beaten." The wild man turned back, took him up, set him on his shoulder, and went with hasty steps into the forest. When the king came home, he observed the empty cage and asked the queen how that had happened. She knew nothing about it and sought the key, but it was gone. She called the boy, but no one answered. The king sent out people to seek for him in the fields, but they did not find him. Then he could easily guess what had happened, and much grief reigned in the royal court. When the wild man had once more reached the dark forest, he took the boy down from his shoulder and said to him, "Thou wilt never see thy father and mother again, but I will keep thee with me, for thou hast set me free, and I have compassion on thee. If thou dost all I bid thee, thou shalt fare well. Of treasure and gold have I enough, and more than anyone in the world." He made a bed of moss for the boy, on which he slept, and the next morning the man took him to a well and said, "Behold, the gold well is as bright and clear as crystal. Thou shalt sit beside it and take care that nothing falls into it, or it will be polluted. I will come every evening to see if thou hast obeyed my order." The boy placed himself by the margin of the well, and often saw a golden fish or golden snake show itself therein, and took care that nothing fell in. As he was thus sitting, his finger hurt him so violently that he involuntarily put it in the water. He drew it quickly out again, but saw that it was quite gilded, and whatsoever pains he took to wash the gold off, all was to no purpose. In the evening, Iron John came back, looked at the boy, and said, "What has happened to the well?" "Nothing, nothing," he answered, and held his finger behind his back, that the man might not see it. But he said, "Thou hast dipped thy finger into the water. This time it may pass, but take care thou dost not again let anything go in." By daybreak, the boy was already sitting by the well and watching it. His finger hurt him again, and he passed it over his head, and then unhappily a hair fell down into the well. He took it quickly out, but it was already quite gilded. Iron John came and already knew what had happened. "Thou hast let a hair fall into the well," said he. "I will allow thee to watch by it once more. But if this happens for the third time, then the well is polluted, and thou canst no longer remain with me." On the third day the boy sat by the well, and did not stir his finger, however much it hurt him. But the time was long to him, and he looked at the reflection of his face on the surface of the water. And as he still bent down more and more while he was doing so, and trying to look straight into the eyes, his long hair fell down from his shoulders into the water. He raised himself up quickly, but the whole of the hair of his head was already golden and shone like the sun. You may imagine how terrified the poor boy was. He took his pocket handkerchief and tied it round his head, in order that the man might not see it. When he came, he already knew everything and said, "Take the handkerchief off." Then the golden hair streamed forth, and let the boy excuse himself as he might, it was of no use. "Thou hast not stood the trial and canst stay here no longer. Go forth into the world, there thou wilt learn what poverty is. But as thou hast not a bad heart, and as I mean well by thee, there is one thing I will grant thee. If thou fallest into any difficulty, come to the forest and cry, Iron John, and then I will come and help thee. My power is great, greater than thou thinkest, and I have gold and silver in abundance. Then the king's son left the forest and walked by beaten and unbeaten paths ever onward until at length he reached a great city. There he looked for work, but could find none, and he had learnt nothing by which he could help himself. At length he went to the palace and asked if they would take him in. The people about court did not at all know what use they could make of him, but they liked him and told him to stay. At length the cook took him into his service and said he might carry wood and water, and rake the cinders together. Once it so happened that no one else was at hand. The cook ordered him to carry the food to the royal table, but as he did not like to let his golden hair be seen, he kept his little cap on. Such a little thing as that had never yet come under the king's notice, and he said, When thou comest to the royal table, thou must take thy hat off. He answered, Ah, Lord, I cannot. I have a bad sore place on my head. Then the king had the cook called before him and scolded him and asked how he could take such a boy as that into his service, and that he was to turn him off at once. The cook, however, had pity on him and exchanged him for the gardener's boy. And now the boy had to plant and water the garden, hoe and dig, and bear the wind in bad weather. Once in summer, when he was working alone in the garden, the day was so warm he took his little cap off that the air might cool him. As the sun shone on his hair, it glittered and flashed so that the rays fell into the bedroom of the king's daughter, and up she sprang to see what that could be. Then she saw the boy and cried to him, Boy, bring me a wreath of flowers. He put his cap on with all haste and gathered wild flowers and bound them together. When he was ascending the stairs with them, the gardener met him and said, How canst thou take the king's daughter a garland of such common flowers? Go quickly and get another and seek out the prettiest and rarest. Oh no, replied the boy. The wild ones have more scent and will please her better. When he got into the room, the king's daughter said, Take thy cap off. It is not seemly to keep it on in my presence. He again said, I may not. I have a sore head. She, however, caught at his cap and pulled it off, and then his golden hair rolled down on his shoulders, and it was splendid to behold. He wanted to run out, but she held him by the arm and gave him a handful of ducats. With these he departed, but he cared nothing for the gold pieces. He took them to the gardener and said, I present them to thy children. They can play with them. The following day the king's daughter again called to him that he was to bring her a wreath of field flowers, and when he went in with it, she instantly snatched at his cap and wanted to take it away from him, but he held it fast with both hands. She again gave him a handful of ducats, but he would not keep them, and gave them to the gardener for playthings for his children. On the third day things went just the same. She could not get his cap away from him, and he would not have her money. Not long afterwards, the country was overrun by war. The king gathered together his people and did not know whether or not he could offer any opposition to the enemy, who was superior in strength and had a mighty army. Then said the gardener's boy, I am grown up and will go seek the war also. Only give me a horse. The others laughed and said, Seek one for thyself when we are gone. We will leave one behind us in the stable for thee. When they had gone forth, he went into the stable and got the horse out. It was lame and limped hobblety jig. Nevertheless, he mounted it and rode away to the dark forest. When he came to the outskirts, he called, Iron John, 3 times so loudly that it echoed enough the trees. Thereupon the wild man appeared immediately and said, What dost thou desire? I want a strong steed, for I am going to the wars. that thou shalt have, and still more than thou askest for." Then the wild man went back into the forest, and it was not long before a stable boy came out of it, who led a horse that snorted with its nostrils and could hardly be restrained, and behind them followed a great troop of soldiers entirely equipped in iron, and their swords flashed in the sun. The youth made over his three-legged horse to the stable boy, mounted the other, and rode at the head of the soldiers. When he got near the battlefield, a great part of the king's men had already fallen, and little was wanting to make the rest give way. Then the youth galloped thither with his iron soldiers, broke like a hurricane over the enemy, and beat down all who opposed him. They began to fly, but the youth pursued, and never stopped, until there was not a single man left. Instead, however, of returning to the king, he conducted his troops by byways back to the forest, and called forth Iron John. "What dost thou desire?" asked the wild man. "Take back thy horse and thy troops, and give me my three-legged horse again." All that he asked was done, and soon he was riding on his three-legged horse. When the king returned to his palace, his daughter went to meet him, and wished him joy of his victory. "I am not the one who carried away the victory," said he, "but a stranger knight who came to my assistance with his soldiers." The daughter wanted to hear who the strange knight was, but the king did not know, and said, "He followed the enemy, and I did not see him again." She inquired of the gardener where his boy was, but he smiled and said, "He has just come home on his three-legged horse, and the others have been mocking him and crying, 'Here comes our hobbly-jig back again.' They asked too, 'Under what hedge hast thou been lying sleeping all the time?' He, however, said, 'I did the best of all, and it would have gone badly without me.' And then he was still more ridiculed. The king said to his daughter, 'I will proclaim a great feast that shall last for 3 days, and thou shalt throw a golden apple. Perhaps the unknown will come to it.' When the feast was announced, the youth went out to the forest and called Iron John. 'What dost thou desire?' asked he. 'That I may catch the king's daughter's golden apple.' 'It is as safe as if thou hadst it already,' said Iron John. 'Thou shalt likewise have a suit of red armor for the occasion, and ride on a spirited chestnut horse.' When the day came, the youth galloped to the spot, took his place amongst the knights, and was recognized by no one. The king's daughter came forward and threw a golden apple to the knights, but none of them caught it but he. Only as soon as he had it, he galloped away. On the second day, Iron John equipped him as a white knight, and gave him a white horse. Again he was the only one who caught the apple, and he did not linger an instant, but galloped off with it. The king grew angry and said, 'That is not allowed. He must appear before me and tell me his name.' He gave the order that if the knight who caught the apple should go away again, they should pursue him, and if he would not come back willingly, they were to cut him down and stab him. On the third day, he received from Iron John a suit of black armor and a black horse, and again he caught the apple. But when he was riding off with it, the king's attendants pursued him, and one of them got so near him that he wounded the youth's leg with the point of his sword. The youth nevertheless escaped from them, but his horse leapt so violently that the helmet fell from the youth's head, and they could see that he had golden hair. They rode back and announced this to the king. The following day the king's daughter asked the gardener about his boy. 'He is at work in the garden. The queer creature has been at the festival too, and only came home yesterday evening. He has likewise shown my children 3 golden apples which he has won.' The king had him summoned into his presence, and he came and again had his little cap on his head. But the king's daughter went up to him, took it off, and then his golden hair fell down over his shoulders, and he was so handsome that all were amazed. "Art thou the knight who came every day to the festival, always in different colors, and who caught the 3 golden apples?" asked the king. "Yes," answered he, "and here the apples are." And he took them out of his pocket and returned them to the king. "If you desire further proof, you may see the wound which your people gave me when they followed me, but I am likewise the knight who helped you to your victory over your enemies. If thou canst perform such deeds as that, thou art no gardener's boy. Tell me, who is thy father?" "My father is a mighty king, and gold have I in plenty as great as I require." "I well see," said the king, "that I owe thanks to thee. Can I do anything to please thee?" "Yes," answered he, "that indeed you can. Give me your daughter to wife." The maiden laughed and said, "He does not stand much on ceremony, but I have already seen his golden hair that he was no gardener's boy." And then she went and kissed him. His father and mother came to the wedding, and were in great delight, for they had given up all hope of ever seeing their dear son again. And as they were sitting at the marriage feast, the music suddenly stopped, the doors opened, and the stately king came in with a great retinue. He went up to the youth, embraced him, and said, "I am Iron John, and was by enchantment a wild man, but thou hast set me free. All the treasures which I possess shall be thy property."